Well, first things first, can we talk about Nickleback?
Yeah.
So there's this story kicking around of you and Chad Kroeger.
Totally.
And that he makes a cameo on the new record. And you talk about meeting him, and correct me if I've got this wrong, but initially you were of the camp of you didn't like some of their stuff, maybe talked a little shit on him. He might have talked a little shit on you. And an overarching theme I'm hoping we can talk about here is something that Carl Jung said one time. He said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves.
Yeah, I could totally appreciate that.
And that's something I've seen in the Nickleback phenomena, and I've seen it in your record too.
Sure.
So I want to get to that. But tell me a little bit about meeting Chad and why he became so important to you.
Well, I mean, I would first say that we're more acquaintances than friends.
Okay.
It's a hard thing for me to put into words, but I'll do my best. I mean, I had heard a Nickleback song. I'd seen them play live, and I heard a song off their most recent record.
Yeah.
And I wrote up on Twitter, I like the new Nickleback song. And the ensuing shitstorm was like crazy.
Right.
I'm never going to listen to your music again because
Right.
you like something that I don't like. But
And it's so cool to hate them.
I guess, right?
It is.
But then, we grew up in the same sort of scene, and we have some mutual friends. So I got a text from him the next day saying, "Hey, thanks for saying nice things about my band." And I said, "Well, to be clear, I haven't always," right?
Right.
But we talked for a little bit, and I said, "Well, maybe when I get back to Vancouver, we can get together and just have a coffee or something." And long story short, I got back to Vancouver, and he invited me over, and I went over, and I spent several days there. And why was it so important to me? Well, number one, I recognized through participation with him that his process that results in music that has sold as many albums as he has
Right.
is fundamentally very similar to the way that I do things. I think prior to that, I had assumed that because the music was something so commercial,
Sure,
in accordance to how I would write, that clearly it's premeditated in a way that is devoid of the things that I hold so dear to the creative process.
right.
But then once I was there, and once I talked to him, and once I saw him write and listen to demos, I realized that it's the same thing. It's just the person that he is results in the music that he writes. And to that end, he was being honest with himself in a way that I think I was flirting with not being.
Because you did mention like flirting with the idea of doing another poppy 3.5 minute, maybe DTP style record and playing it safe.
Which I still enjoy and I still would like to do.
Sure.
But only if it's like a compulsion to do so.
Yeah.
And watching him function, I was like, wow, this guy's clearly very intelligent and he's clearly very connected to what he does. And the amount of shit that he's taken for being who he is was something that I guess I found really eye-opening. I just maybe had assumed that he was disingenuous artistically.
Right.
But then when I recognized that he wasn't, it's just different than who I am. I also realized that the pursuit of material gain through art, that I think a lot of us who, at least in the genre that I'm in, and maybe not like I'm struggling financially, but you're certainly below the millionaire line, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of times where you think, well, if only I got to that level of success, then all these problems would disappear. And I think another thing that I recognized through that meeting, and this is kind of unbeknownst to him, I would imagine, but he's just such a type A, alpha dog type of personality.
Yeah.
Just, like the guy's a rock star.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's why he has all that stuff. It wasn't like a pursuit of that necessarily. It's just that the combination of who he is, what his biases are, and his personality type have resulted in something that, upon seeing, I was like, well, it would be foolish for me to try and pursue that. It's like ridiculous. This isn't a pursuit. That's a byproduct,
I love that this guy that's demonized for being insincere, or people think he is anyway, inspired you away from that path and into making this record that is so like quintessentially you.
Yeah. Well, I think had I not had that experience, it would have certainly manifested itself differently. And again, this is why I preface this by saying it's, we're acquaintances more than friends.
Sure.
Because it's just, I find that level of intensity and that level of activity that he has in his life, and the houses and the money and all this sort of, and the hatred and all this sort of thing, is just fucking exhausting, man. Right. But because he's very much, type A, he seems to be able to surf it in a way that I think, okay, well, clearly that's why you're able to have all these things.
Right.
So it was really good for me to realize, I'm like, well, not only is this not something that I feel like I should be pursuing, but I feel that if I ever got it, it would be the end of me. You know what I mean?
How so?
I feel that in order to be in a certain tax bracket, unless you've fallen into it, you've got to make decisions that are really, I don't want to by any stretch of the imagination say that anybody in this certain high tax bracket that you have to be a sociopath to do that. But right. I guess what I'm saying is CEOs and companies, people who are responsible for vast amounts of wealth, every decision they make basically in order to proceed along that trajectory of furthering that wealth is going to fuck over a whole bunch of other people. And you have to be psychologically prepared to make those decisions.
So speaking of a decision like that, you ended the Devin Townsend project.
For sure.
Are there hard feelings there?
Yeah. But I'm glad that you brought that up, because I got everybody 3 months of severance pay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, whatever that was. And, a bunch of gear, and I gave the other guys a bunch of gear. So it's like my nature, I know it was difficult for them, but I also knew I had to do it. And that decision is very much in line with my meeting with Chad as well, because I hadn't ended the band prior to seeing him. But I recognize that there's also a fine line between making decisions that promote and further your career and fucking people over versus knowing you have to make certain decisions for your own mental health. What's the least destructive way of doing that?
Right.
So in the ways that I could, I made DTP the least destructive that I could upon ending it. But I had to. And if I had not, it wouldn't have been particularly healthy for me.
Right.
Yeah. I'm still friends with everybody, but it was difficult. Yeah.
I can only imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So you're obviously a pretty sensitive guy, the name of the record. I hope this isn't too obvious a question, but do you believe in this construct of being an empath? There are people who call themselves that.
Well, let me think. I think that, I guess it depends on the definition. I think that another way of looking at empath as a title would just be highly sensitive, right?
Right.
And I very much believe in that. And to varying degrees, I would put myself somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. But even where I am, I have a very hard time. I have a very hard time ignoring energy and not absorbing energy, right? If there's if somebody's depressed, or if somebody's angry, or if somebody's sad, or what have you, I have a hard time not reflecting that in some way. And whether or not that is empathy or narcissism, where I just feel like everything is ultimately about me on some level. I'm not sure. But whatever it is, it has been something that up until recently I hadn't recognized was as much of a liability as it has been.
Uh-huh.
So prior to the record starting, I investigated, I guess, what would you look up online, empathy training, which sounds pretty hippie. But I think the gist of it is, how do you interact with other entities and not allow their frame of mind, their personality, their toxicity, or whatever, to infiltrate you to the point where you are constantly being bombarded by these things. And there's a lot of places that one can look online to help, sort of work on techniques to do so. And so that's where it started. But as is the case with everything that I do creatively, it's each piece of work that I end up completing is ultimately a thesis on a certain period of time.
Sure.
So it was inevitable that once I started to pinpoint the fact that hypersensitivity to others was something that was of very problematic for what I've chosen to do for a career.
Right.
And once I recognized that my idea was to okay, well, how do we find a solution to this?
Yeah.
And sort of rambled. But as the process unfolded as a result of that being early on in this process, I think creatively I started to explore a lot of repressed parts of my nature, right?
I can see that. Like the album art itself just speaks that super clearly.
Yeah.
And I'll post this on the show notes for those of you that are listening to it. Definitely look at the show notes. It's beautiful, beautiful art. And just to describe it briefly, there's a water line, and underneath the water line, there are all these just this incredibly vibrant sea life and just all these crazy creatures swimming around, and it's tumultuous. And then above you have this big sky and a volcano. And again, Devin, as I was getting ready, I stumbled across some stuff from Carl Jung, and so much of it just jumped out at me. Another thing he said that reminded me of your album art was man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. Mm-hmm. And
I agree with that.
And he said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart, and who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Mm-hmm. And
very much.
Yeah. This record, I see you wrestling with that duality.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a wrestle in terms of the actualization of it. But I think, if I may, I think that almost the whole point of the record was to observe the wrestle, more so than be it.
Okay.
And so, as a result of that, my emotional connection to the lyrics, my emotional connection to the aesthetic of each one of these pieces of music that are dynamically different from each other, was more about, I think in the past I had considered that certain parts of my creative identity that I couldn't quantify for whatever reason were in fact an aberration rather than just a part of me that I was unwilling or unable to face. So that resulted in years of me consciously not wanting to make any music that was really heavy, or not wanting to make any music that was really lyrically provocative in ways that would leave me vulnerable. Okay. But I think that in hindsight, as all these records proceed and as these essays get written and you read them in retrospect, I realized that perhaps when we had children, I became more aware of how vulnerable we are as people, as species, as artists, as entities, or what have you. And so I think that I started to cloak a lot of my true emotional connection in metaphor. And it wasn't until I did the Ocean Machine show that I recognized that I'd sort of lost that path. Mm. But in order to reconnect with the past and look at each one of these aesthetics that ended up on Empath in reference to how they were manifested in my the history of what I've done, required me not participating in them like in a real visceral way. Yeah. It was more about, okay, we'll just let it have its voice.
Right.
And in that way you have to be of two minds, because you have to really participate in it to sing it or produce it. But the overarching theme of it, of the Empath record, is just observe it. Let it be its thing, but just don't let it define you.
It's very yin and yang.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's the track. I have to look at the track listing. It's the one that is mostly you singing, and they almost your record label didn't want it to be on
why?
there. Yeah, why? Which is right after the really heavy one that has Chad on it. That whole thing is so yin and yang. And like when I heard why for the first time, I thought, well, of course this is on here.
Sure,
It's just the flipping to the other side of it. I'm curious if I'm reading too much into these lyrics, but there's in the last part of the last track on Singularity, part 4, Curious Gods. I see some things pointing at like the myth of the Garden of Eden. Was that on your mind at all when you wrote that?
Well, the whole prior to when I started, I made a map of the album.
Yeah,
and I really liked the hero's quest. I really liked the
Joseph Campbell.
Campbell. Yeah. So that was certainly an overarching concept on the whole album.
Okay.
But that particular part, consciously, no, it wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like when you say try the papaya, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you. I mean, what's funny a lot of times is lyrically, people will hear what I write and
sure,
and think that it means something deeper than it does.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting to me, at least, is the lyrics are so literal. And I'll give you a practical example of that in the past. Like when I was doing the record Terria, I had been at a psychiatric institution for a lot of things, which, long story short, was just an unguided mushroom trip, I think. But at the time, it was deemed, schizophrenia or whatever. So I was in these psychiatric institutions, and then they put me on all these antipsychotic medications and blah, blah, blah. And I had this dog that we had adopted, but it was the prior owners were Cantonese, so it didn't know any English, and it was just this belligerent
speaking dog.
Yep. And so on the Terria Song Mountain, I was just depressed, but I was really numb because of the medication. So there's a lyric that says, so far I've logged so many hours with 2 medications and a dog, and that's exactly what it was about. There's no
metaphor there.
No metaphor at all. And with the try the papaya thing, part of the Empath project, a big part of it, was me sort of going back and making, I'm not even making peace, but allowing the part of my creative identity that I had viewed as being flawed, recognize that, no, you just got a lot of anger in you. You've got a lot of this, that, and the other thing. And until you allow it to have a voice, you're not going to know, you're just going to be afraid of it. So a lot of that particular part of the song, in my mind's eye, the demons come, but they're you, and they're your trip. And at the end there, they're walking by and they're sulking because you didn't go with them.
Yeah.
And then they're saying, selfish Messiah, selfish Messiah. And then in my mind's eye, I'm sitting in a lawn chair, with a drink.
Yeah.
And as they walk by, the women are like, don't worry about them. Try the papaya. You know what I mean? It's like, so it was really, I don't think it was really much deeper than that.
I love that.
I like the idea as well that you can watch them go, and it's just like, that's a part of it, right? Like, and I think that Empath was really important to me because up to Empath, I think I had feared it.
Are you a fan of Jordan Peterson by any chance?
I am.
Yeah. What do you think of his work?
I like his accent. He's got a real thick Canadian accent. I think my only problem with Jordan Peterson, is not a problem, is because he's been the subject of so much antagonistic, like with the whole pronouns and like the amount of shit that he's gotten for that has put him on the defensive in such a way that whenever I see interviews with him now, he always seems like he's angry in a way that I think doesn't do credit to what he's saying. But
it's
I think
not his best outfit.
Yeah, it isn't, because he's so well spoken and he's so clever and he's so pragmatic with his thoughts that, if he hadn't have been just ruthlessly interrogated in some really dumb ways, I think it would be easier now to sort of participate with him.
Did you read his book 12 Rules?
I haven't, but I've heard it's really good.
It's
actually.
excellent. Yeah, he deconstructs. I mean, being a fan of Joseph Campbell's stuff as you are, you'd really appreciate the way he goes through.
Oh, I'll check it out.
Looks at these old myths and translates them into modern.
Oh, that's cool. I'll check it out. Yeah.
It's really cool stuff. Speaking of particulars of songs, I have a kind of a weird question for you. Digging back into your catalog, there is, let's see, what was the song? Well, I'll just ask you this. Has H. John Benjamin ever made a cameo on any of your records?
I don't know who it is.
Okay, he's the guy that voices Archer. It's on the Ziltoid record, okay? When the Omniscient is speaking.
Yeah. That's my buddy.
It sounds just like him.
You know what? It's like I never got into Archer, but I really liked Frisky Dingo. I thought that was great.
I never saw that.
That was the ones that it was the same basic art style, but it was before.
I see.
You know what I mean? But it's
did you watch like C-Lab 2020? Same kind of thing. Same style.
I'm limited with my the only shows that I've seen recently that I really like. Check it out with Dr. Steve Brule. I thought that was amazing.
Okay.
Because was it William C. Riley, or is that his name? The guy that was in Step Brothers and
John C. Riley.
John C. Riley.
Yeah, he's funny.
So he's got this thing called Check It Out, which is pretty amazing. But other than that, I'm pretty limited with my. We got rid of cable years ago, man.
Nice.
Yeah.
What inspires you these days? Well, actually, let me re-ask that question.
Sure.
What I thought was interesting, something I read, or I've kind of followed you on Twitter, talking about this journey with Empath, where like right after it came out, you seemed to be in a pretty dark place, where you're like, guys, if this doesn't sell well, I might have to quit music.
Sure.
You know, and then here you are out on the road doing these acoustic shows, and I saw you post something like, oh my gosh, I've got this new flood of ideas. I'm writing like crazy.
Sure.
What was that? Tell me about that journey from that dark spot of, oh my God, I might have to quit, to just wait till you hear what I'm doing now.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that my life is public. And like you and I and everybody, I mean, I have moods. I go up and down.
Sure.
And it's just that on the lower middle class level that I function at in the music industry, my thoughts are preposterously public. And when I went out after I finished the record just kicked my ass, man, is what it was. It was like, and even the quote about having to quit music, I mean, that's what it ended up becoming paraphrased as. Devin Townsend says, I spent a bunch of money on this record, and if I don't recoup it, I have to quit music. But I don't know if I ever actually said that.
That was the vibe of it.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think I'd be interested to see what I actually wrote, because I think the vibe was compounded by the fact that the label was pissed off at me. Oh. So I kind of panicked, and I was like, oh my God, if I don't do this, right?
Okay.
But I guess my point with this answer is, my life has been years ago, you know, during the time where I was like into psychedelics and whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like, dude, I was doing interviews during all that time too. You know what I mean? I was like viewed literally in some circles in European press as like, that guy is fucking crazy, right?
Is this like the Strapping Lad days?
No, it was after. It was with Physicist.
Okay.
And so I think there's two parts to the answer. One is that it's like my life is just, it's like I'm an emotional guy. I go up and down. I try and suppress it to the point where I don't make it as big a deal. But I find that the more popular things have become for me, much of what I say gets turned into a much bigger deal than I intended it to be.
Sure.
That's a good example of it. Uh-huh. And then the other part of it is, I forget.
Well, what I was curious about is that the process you went from being in that really dark spot of being really just seemingly worried about it to being full of ideas, and it's, you know, you posted about, you know, you've got all this great new stuff that you've been conjuring up now that the record's out and you're out doing these acoustic shows.
I probably just got laid. You know what I mean? Like,
sure, I mean, that'll do it for you.
It doesn't take much, man. Like, I think a lot of a lot of the perceived drama that gets put into this stuff, I mean, I have to put my head in my hands over a lot of the things that happen in my career, because it's not a big deal. I mean, since that time, I just maybe got a good night's sleep, and
Right.
maybe things. And what I also find really interesting about my career in general is I write and function on such a automatic level. Like I don't think about it. If I think about it, it's never as good as if I'm just vomiting, right?
Right.
Yet the nature of my career has been that I've been interviewed during the whole process.
Yeah.
And I say absurd things, and I do absurd things with music that I don't think are an indicator of like a rational mind, but I'm just like, wouldn't it be funny if we had a talking puppet, or if we empath or ziltoid or anything?
Sure.
Yet those whims you're almost put to task for on a certain level, because then you do 4 months worth of interviews. Like, well, why did you do that?
Why the fart jokes? Why?
Why? And I'm like, the easiest answer would be like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. It seemed right at the time. Yet that doesn't really work. So as a result of that, I've had to learn how to articulate things in my own creative process that I would never have chosen to.
Is that kind of a drag, though?
Oh my God, totally. Oh my God.
All right, let's not even do that.
No, I think it's okay. I think it's okay, because the byproduct of that is I've learned a shitload about myself, right? Like what my motivations were or are, and I think there's a certain value to that. But like I just do, like a lot of times I just do things because I think it's funny.
Right. That's clear.
But that's as far as it goes, right? And it's like, and then I'll have I did a bunch of interviews in Europe directly after Empath, and there's people that take these absurd things so seriously that they just won't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
Like there must be some underlying reason why you did that. I was like, I just thought it was funny. It's like, no, but it's got to be an indicator of something else. I was like, all right, maybe it is. Maybe it's an indicator. But you know what I mean? It's like, so you end up deconstructing your own improv to the point where, as a byproduct, you've got maybe some sort of interesting insight, but ultimately, it even that doesn't matter, right?
That sounds like that would kind of suck, honestly.
It does, but I also feel that it's a job that I have chosen, right? Yeah. And the interview process is such a big part of it.
Sure.
So, going back to the last question, I've said so many things over the years, man. Like so many things that if I was held to, I would be impeached a million times over in the offices of creative freedom. You know what I mean? Like everything, like, oh, I'm vegan. Oh, I'm not vegan. Oh, I'm sober. Oh, I'm not sober. Oh, I never do drugs again. Oh, I'm high as fuck. I mean, it's like, it's like, so what I find for myself now, that it's just easier for me just to write and make sure that it gives me that visceral reaction that resonates on some level with the truth, so that hopefully when other people hear it through the bias that I present, that you either take or leave, there may be something that other people can say, oh, I recognize the truth in that. Sure. That ultimately is all that matters.
Then you're good.
But all the rest, like me as a person, I'm a fucking gong show, man. Like the fact that there's and this is almost something that has been troublesome to me for many years, is that another Carl Jung thing that I really appreciate is the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
I like the idea that as artists, our role is to have an experience that strikes a primal nerve, that allows us to be in the presence of something that is beyond us, something that resonates with the truth, and then through who we are, what we've learned, what we play, what we don't play, where we're from, what our gender is, whatever, you say, here's my interpretation of that experience. Yeah. And the hope is that other people who have a sensitivity to your bias don't hear all that shit. They don't hear the notes and songs and chords and everything. They hear the experience. And from that point of view, what you're resonating with as an artist is something that is universal. It's got nothing to do with you. Right. So a lot of times that sort of the cult of personality, where people project their feelings. You've had an emotional reaction to a piece of work, whether or not it's art or film or whatever, and they think, well, clearly it's that person that did that. And ultimately, I like to think that all artists that are worth their salt are just conduits to something that are, that is larger than us.
Elizabeth Gilbert said some interesting things about the muse being kind of like an entity that comes to artists. And she really talked about this, about how literally we are just conduits. We give birth to ideas.
I agree.
So you buy into that?
Totally, yeah. Oh. My friend won't let me, though. He's like, I've known this guy for years. Yeah. He's just like, no, it's like, because you got low self-esteem, you're just not willing to accept.
I have one of those friends too.
Yeah, he's like, you're not willing to accept the fact that it's you.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I'll tell you, it is me. Like, what you hear is me.
Yeah.
But what the impetus for it is something that is beyond me.
Sure.
And I'll stick to that, absolutely.
So what have you learned about friendship when you have like this friend that sounds like he's like very rational and kind of like holds your feet to the fire of rationality, while you yourself are swimming around in the sea of Carl Jung's collective unconscious and spirituality, or whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
Like, how do you what's that friendship like? Like, how do you navigate that?
Well, I think if your objectives in life are to actualize yourself as an entity, the absence of people who will hold your feet to the fire is not a great way to go,
Right.
The career that I found myself in, when you start generating money for people, a lot of times they'll tell you whatever you want to hear.
Oh, yeah.
Like if the organization that I'm spearheading or writing for is profitable, then you just get a lot of people that don't want to lose their job.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find as it becomes more profitable, there'll be people that are like, oh, I'll wash your clothes for you. Oh, don't worry, man. I know it's not part of my job description, but I got you. Or I'll organize all the pots and pans and the bus thing. I know it's not my job, and a lot of times in the past, I was like, oh, everybody, they're just really nice. But, and not to say that they're not.
Sure.
But people's reasons for doing these things, it's just like most of our reasons. It's just like, well, you got friends and family that you want to feed, and you're trying to be successful and all these sorts of things. And so having people in my life that are completely disconnected from what I do professionally, I've got a lot of people in my life I've known for 30 plus years. They're like my closest friends, right? Mm-hmm. And they know me independent of any of this stuff. Most of them don't listen to what I do, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, they hear it, but it's not like the same level of interest as somebody who maybe either has a vested interest in you and financially or somebody who's a fan or whatever, right?
You're just Devin, the guy that puts out records.
Totally. And so my relationship with them is such that if this all ended tomorrow, I got a whole bunch of people that would help me move. I've got a lot of people that have got my back, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And I got a lot of other people's backs too, right? Sure. And I think that if there's anything I've learned about my career over the past couple of decades, is that if what you do professionally, you invest so much of your identity in, that in absence of it, you cease to exist. Man, you're going to be going around the block, for a long time.
So take away the guitar and the music and all that.
Yeah.
Who's Devin?
I mean, I think it's, again, I think in line with being asked so much about my creative process for so long. I've spent huge amounts of time buried in this kind of self-analysis.
Sure.
But who am I? I mean, I'm 47.
Yeah.
I'm basic psychologically, but I'm complicated artistically. I've got a high level of weird internal morality that seems to limit my ability to do things that my self-destructive hedonism side would gladly do. The idea of spirituality, not religion, but spirituality in general is maybe the most important thing in my life. Certainly the most important thing in my music. I'm a dad. I'm a son. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a friend. I'm self-deprecating. I've got hang-ups about a lot of things. I'm fundamentally happy. Yeah, man, endless. I'm a brown cow, but from outer space.
I love that. I think that's a perfect place to end it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Devin. I really appreciate it.
You too, my friend. Thank you very much.